Spawn On Me is the premier podcast spotlighting people of color. Every week, we talk news, what we've been playing, and tell you who's invited to the cookout. Our show is all about talking about gaming through a prism of blackness, because we are the culture. Welcome to Chicago, y'all.
Yo, what up, everybody here in Spawn On Me land? Welcome to Chicago. Welcome to 2025, and welcome to year 11 of the Spawn On Me podcast. I'm your host, Kahlief Adams, here rocking with you as your host as we go through the interwebs to find all the goodness that is about gaming in our show and around the world. Thank you again for making 2024 a stellar year for us. It has been a fantastic, dope year, and we just want to continue that rolling into 2025. We took a break, so we missed a couple of weeks hanging out, reconvening with family, being with friends, and all that kind of goodness. And now we are back into the almost second week of January. So we have a lot of good things to talk about. We have some fun conversations for our show this week and every week. And I wanted to say, first off, again, thank you everybody who's been a fan of the show for so long. All the words of encouragement about trying to find good ways to make great shows and good content always hits in the heart and always feels really, really good to be able to do for all of you at home and making sure that we're making, some strides here on our podcast and the work that we get a chance to do here. So if you have not already followed our show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please go do so. You can find our video versions of our show mostly on Spotify, with us finally getting my ass off the couch and doing things and putting them up on YouTube this year. So we're going to be trying to do that in the full ways as well, to make sure that we are in a good spot moving forward and getting you all the GOAT content that you need. It has been a wonderful week. It has been nice to have some time off and to get back into the groove. And it's been nice to be able to already have some really fun things on the table for 2025 with some potential new shows, some new content, some appearances already getting booked out and getting things ready for the new year. So again, thank you all for that. We're going to get right into it with some conversations and some stories. And we have a very special guest to talk about one topic in particular, but first let's get into the 411. First up on the 411 is the Xbox Developer Direct that is happening on January 23rd. So that'll be coming up next week. We'll be having some really fun conversations and content to come to you all around that event. And once all the goodness comes out, we'll be talking about all of it on the back end. They have a couple of games that are going to be showing off from some folks that we've been waiting to hear more about their products and more about their titles. So the folks from Doom are going to be bringing their goodness to the space. So the folks over at id are going to be talking about their newest game. The folks from Compulsion Games are going to be talking about South of Midnight. I'm sure a longer, potentially gameplay reveal of more of the game there will be dropping, and I'm super excited for that. There is a special game that folks have not seen yet that's supposed to be dropping and being shown for what those games are going to wind up being. And lastly, we have the amazing folks from Claire Obscura Expedition 33 will be showing off their game. So Sandfall Interactive will be showing off their game as well. So Doom the Dark Ages, South of Midnight, Claire Obscura Expedition 33, and a special not known game, a hidden surprise title, should be showcased as well during this show. I think this is a really fantastic showing of games that I think a lot of folks have been looking forward to, alongside the idea of id showing off more Doom, which is something that I've been really excited for. I remember seeing that gameplay trailer with the skull shooter that was in that game that looked wild. I think everyone is really hyped for Expedition 33. I think that game is probably on the top of a lot of ours most anticipated game list for this year. And then South of Midnight, you've seen me doing some work with the folks from Compulsion for a while now. We did our conversation in Montreal at the studio. We also had our trip to Afrotech this year and showcased and had a great panel with folks from the team over there and from the Xbox team. And I think no one knows yet what the special kind of hidden game is going to be. There have been some rumors swirling around what that is. Some folks are saying, it's come from a major IP from Japan that is well known and beloved. And it may be making a return. I've seen some rumblings around people talk about Ninja Gaiden as being the game that gets shown for what that is. Who knows what that could potentially be? It could be something that, it could be Ninja Gaiden. It could be a banjo game, but that's not really a Japanese game. I don't know what it's going to wind up being, but it's going to be dropping at 10 a.m. Pacific on January 23rd with some really interesting games to be able to showcase at a time when lots of conversations are around, what is Xbox doing from a marketing perspective? What is Xbox doing from a company moving forward perspective? I think they have a lot of good energy right now that is moving in their direction and moving towards them, with Jason Ronald having some more discussions around what they're doing on the mobile platform with their handheld, and at least in terms of bringing the Xbox ecosystem into more of those mobile platforms. I think they have a lot of good karma moving into 2025, and I think a really fantastic slate of games that are going to be coming up very, very soon that I think all of us are going to be really excited and hyped for. So I am, excited as heck for what that winds up being and where that's going to wind up landing moving forward into the space. So I think that's great. I think that's hype. That's going to be really, really cool. If there are games that you are expecting to be there, please let us know in the comments below. Let us know, in the responses to the show. I also am in a space where I'm thinking about, so what does this mean for, how many of these we're going to get through the rest of the year? They're starting off early in the year this time, already in January, already in Q1. Do we see a couple of these, or do we see maybe one a quarter, maybe one every other quarter? What does that mean going forward for Xbox and Microsoft in terms of where they're landing their ship? Does that mean that they'll be not hiding, but they'll be holding off on potential hardware discoveries or hardware conversations that are not the handheld that has been rumored for so long? That could be something as well that's in the conversation for later on in the year. We're seeing the fan Phil Spencer appear on Destin Legary's new show after him leaving IGN this week, and Gamertag Radio with our friends Danny Pena, Pete, and Paris. So we're going to see, for their 20th year anniversary, you're going to see more Xbox brass making more appearances in some places. We should also hopefully have some folks on our show sometime in 2025. Fingers crossed for that. We'd love to get Sarah Bond back on the show, get Jason Ronald back on the show, and of course, Phil. We'd love to have Phil Spencer as well pop up on Bricago to be a part of our conversations with them about where the future of Xbox is going, because this is an Xbox and everything's an Xbox, so we know they will have lots of places for their games to land. Second story of the week is all about the Switch 2 and that potentially being debuted or at least announced this week. Supposedly, there have been a ton of rumors about the Switch being shown somewhere online this Thursday. There have been some rumors coming out of CES about form factor. There were so many mock-ups and versions of what the hardware is supposed to be through peripherals and through other pieces of hardware, kind of talking about how they're going to connect with this new device, that it feels a little wild right now to know that we're going to get a new Switch, and weirdly that most of the internet already knows more about it than Nintendo has shared. That's the thing about leaks, and that's the thing about games getting shown or hardware getting shown a little bit earlier than potentially wanted. But, with the hardware pieces coming in and seeing where that's all going to land, I think the Switch 2 is going to be something that's going to be formidable in the space. I think they've already shown how well that piece of gear does in terms of, household name recognition in sales, in ways that the platform has given more Nintendo fans a big space to be able to play for the games that they have and the games that they want. We've seen all of those discussions and the Nintendo fandom always come to the forefront and really support what Nintendo has been doing. My personal hope is that we see more discussions about infrastructure from them. I think, we may see, pieces of hardware and peripherals come out, because I think that's been the focus. If they do show anything, it won't be about games. It'll just be about the hardware itself, which could be an entire Nintendo Direct in and of itself. But what we do hopefully get a chance to hear, and maybe this is a thing that we see on the Xbox Direct, is will Xbox games start to get ported over to Nintendo platforms in another way outside of Minecraft? Minecraft so far was the only game that I've seen so far that I can remember off the top of my head that made that transition over. There may be one or two other ones that may be in the space, but will this be the sign of more collaboration happening between Nintendo and other outlets in those ways as well? That could be something that is extremely cool to be able to see coming down the pipe and be a thing that happens moving forward in a direction that is, very relevant in the ways that we are hoping for. I don't want to dig into the specs. I don't think the specs matter that much, especially for a Nintendo handheld. I did have a really good discussion with some folks over on the DLC podcast. Shout out to Christian Spicer and to Jeff Kanata for having me on a couple of weeks ago. And there being a patent filed from Nintendo that basically would shrink down or using basically not AI, but the same kind of technology you see used in, PSSR or NVIDIA and their work in terms of giving you better frame rates for less actual pixel density in the ways that you're used to seeing. So that, games can be smaller but still have the fidelity that they want to have. There's some technology in this piece of kit that I'm really hyped to see where they're going to go. Do we get a new form factor on the Joy-Cons? Do we get some other connectivity when you dock this thing to your television in a way that we had been rumored about for the Xbox handheld? Of do you get a significant boost in terms of playability and in terms of frame rate and those things? Do you get a bigger boop? You get a bigger boost in fidelity coming out of that console and coming out of that handheld? Lots of different things to be able to discuss in ways that are going to be exciting for, this piece of gear moving into 2025. And what does this mean for Nintendo in the larger discussion? I've always felt like Nintendo has played it fairly. They've done a good balance. They've played it really safe in some aspects when it comes to hardware, especially infrastructure. But they've also done some of the wildest things in terms of hardware configuration and playability and all of those things over the years, with everything from the Wiimote to Joy-Cons and having detachable, basically joysticks attached to a console. So, who knows what this actually is? Maybe they throw a dope wrinkle in there that we didn't see coming, and that could be really, fantastic to see them thinking again, future facing and finding interesting ways to connect with an audience that really cares about what they do in the space in a much bigger way. The third story that I want to dig into the 411 for this week is a good one, because I think this one speaks to the current climate that we wind up seeing right now. And I do have a fantastic guest to talk about this with while we have this discussion. But I do want to give it a little bit of a preface and say, Square Enix has come out and changed some of their harassment policies internally and externally. They said, should Square Enix determine that an individual has engaged in an action against one of our employees or partners that exceeds socially acceptable behavior or is harmful, we reserve our right to cease providing support services or to refrain from providing our group's products or services. Where such action is egregious or with malicious intent, Square Enix reserves the right to protect its employees and partners and take legal action or criminal proceedings upon consulting the police and/or lawyers. Action which Square considers customer harassment or to exceed socially acceptable behavior is also including but not limited to a ton of examples, which we'll go through in a second with our guest, who I want to bring on right now to talk about not only where this kind of leads to, but what are we seeing in the space and why this might be really, really important. I want to bring on the fam, Alyssa Mercante, right now to talk about where we see all of this going, what the future of a policy like this can hold. Let's talk to Alyssa right about now. And I couldn't think of someone better to talk about this conversation around Square Enix's new policy than the homie, the fam, Alyssa Mercante. How are you doing, fam? How's everything going?
Yo, I'm so good. It's so good to see you again.
So good to see you. I'm excited to talk to you about this because this is a thing that is near and dear to both of our hearts, something that we both are really trying to pay attention to in the biggest ways. And I think this is something that I think is pretty groundbreaking in terms of what Square Enix is trying to do. I know you've talked about this on your own show. Fantastic work on the work you've been doing on Twitch. It's been really fun to be able to come over and come hang out and see more of the work.
Thank you.
But, I think we've seen an uptick again in online harassment in the gaming space. I think one of the things that has been most difficult to see has been, companies coming together and doing the work of saying loudly and proudly that this is not behavior that we want to see in our space. I thought you had a really great stream that you talked about this in depth and talked about the ramifications and also what we are hoping to see from more of this. What are your thoughts about the kind of latest return to hopefully some flags getting planted in the sand from companies like Square Enix?
Yeah, I mean, so they've obviously been, which company has been at the center of a harassment campaign in the last 10 months? I mean, try and find me one. Been at the center of like a really specific one that a lot of hate and harassment was sent towards the trans voice actor for a new character that was introduced with the Dawn Trail expansion and Final Fantasy XIV. And they also get like a very interesting version of harassment that I think has a lot to do with kind of the way offices are run and organized in Japan, because this does say, this policy, that it's like, it's based on rules and regulations in Japan, but it could be applied globally. So like with that in mind, that's where some of the wording about like showing up at the office and like camping out at the office, that's like something that's a little bit leaning more towards Japanese culture. A lot of these offices are like, they're not the way that they are here, where you have to like swipe an ID card to get it's not really like the same thing. But on a scale of like talking about harassment of employees regarding, gender harassment, based on like personal attacks or harassment based on identities or incessant contact or demanding that there be treatment for an employee, that's all kind of stuff that's pulled right out of this Gamergate 2 playbook. That's all things that they do kind of consistently with whoever they've got in their line of sight at any time, at any point in time. So I think it's really interesting to see them kind of hitting sort of everything that these bad actors have tried in the last 10 months to sort of discredit, defame or scare people at companies off the internet. So they really kind of went for all of it, which is cool.
Yeah, I want to read off really the kind of like levels of things that they're talking to, because I think one of the conversations that is often happening in the space when it comes to harassment of folks in the gaming industry has been this kind of nebulous kind of, form of harassment that has so many different layers. It is very much the multi-pronged attack version of what they try to do. But I love what Square talked about here. They said, here are some things we want to fight against. active violence and violent behavior, abusive language, intimidation, coercion, putting people under duress, excessive pursuit of reprimand, defamation, persistent inquiries, repeated visits, like you talked about there, trespassing, which is also, again, wild. The folks are just rolling up on people's houses and workplaces, unlawful restraint, including via telephone calls and online inquiries, discriminatory speech against race, ethnicity, religion, family origin, occupation, infringement of privacy by taking pictures or making video recordings without consent. That is a huge deal because of the way that the YouTube space has worked and so many other spaces has worked as well. And of course, demands for punishment of our employees, which is also a huge part of the way that a lot of these bad actors behave themselves, while also trying to lionize themselves in their supposed cause that says, you are offending us as consumers, and we want those folks eliminated in terms of their work at the companies that they have. This laying out of the kind of, the check boxes of harassment, how does that also play into what we've seen and what we've heard from companies like Bungie, who came about with a suit earlier, I think in this year or last year, that really showed a moment where companies are actually going out and enforcing these policies in ways that are actually causing, some of the harassers to have to pay money and retribution in these ways. What are your thoughts about how these things have kind of come to pass?
Yeah, I mean, Bungie, I think it actually might have even been 2023. Like, time is a flat circle, and I don't know which way is up at this point. But one of the things that Bungie discussed when they successfully won a lawsuit against an individual who was harassing, doxing, and terrorizing one of their employees who happened to be a Black man. One of the things that they cited in their court case was the cost that they incurred having to send out like protections for this employee because his address had been leaked, and the person who was terrorizing him clearly knew his address because he was he sent a pizza there, and he was calling a bunch, calling his wife's phone. So it was very obvious that there had been a breach of privacy. So they had to send out, executive, I guess, security. They had to, and then they had to like cover all their bases in terms of keeping this person safe and bringing this person who was attacking them to trial. So that's like a very high financial cost. And to be quite frank, there's not a lot of great examples of this stuff being litigated. And so when it did go through and the suit was won in Bungie's favor, the legal team at Cusk Law, who I am very familiar with, were kind of lauded this as a situation where it's a great example of showcasing how the line between the internet and the real world is incredibly thin, maybe not even there at all, and that the actions that you take part in that seem to be just virtual or digital have real world consequences for people, including, this poor man and his wife were terrorized for days, but this person was leaving slurs on their voicemail and demanding that they add like an N-word killer into Destiny 2, all because they had shared the artwork of a Black content creator. And I think what Square Enix is doing and how well they can actually litigate this in Japan, like if something comes across their table where it's very clear, like someone is obsessively harassing a voice actor or something like that, I'm not sure exactly what kind of precedent there is there for, actually going forward and having legal action against them. But it's very clear that it's not something that they're, not considering. And I think the more precedent there is, be it in Japan or in America, where cases like this are going through and are in favor of the people being harassed, the more likely companies might be willing to take a chance and take a stance against this. So I think it's a good thing. But anybody who's upset about it, I'm just kind of like, why are you upset about don't harass people and then you don't have to worry? Like, it's really easy.
Like, I don't know who's team pro harassment. I mean, I do know who's team pro harassment, but it's like the idea that, having that be a thing that you want to engage in 2025 around video games is still bizarre to me in any form or fashion. But it does speak to the idea that companies are now willing to potentially spend resources towards safeguarding their employees in a way that we hadn't really seen happen, in a public way. I think sometimes it happens behind the scenes, where, the temperature rises up to a space where you have to kind of do that work internally, but it never really goes out to be the signal to say, y'all are effing around and about to find out in a major way. I think the thing that I'd love to hear your thoughts on is around, this does feel like potentially precedent setting in a good way. Do you feel like, though, in the current temperature that we've seen, where we've also seen a lot of companies turtle a bunch, we've seen the folks most recently from Lords of the Fallen share a message externally about how they don't want any political messaging in their games, and they're not going to put any DEI in their games. Do you feel like we're still seeing this potential space, vacillate a lot between, do we say the thing out loud that we're seeing, or do we pander to a lot of these audiences or a lot of these folks who are doing this work, to make them feel more welcomed than the folks that they would be, hurting in this space?
Yeah. I mean, so much of this is such a dance that's done behind the scenes at these companies that, I hear whispers of certain companies that are, conservative with a lowercase c, that don't want to rock the boat and say something publicly, but they have people in their ranks who have been harassed by the same bad actors that are doing stuff like this. I think we're going to keep seeing a push and pull. And I think, we saw a prime example of what just happened with CD Projekt Red, where Mikhail Noak, I'm not sure how to say his last name, but he's heading up Witcher 4, and he was kind of debunking some conspiracy theories that, there was nobody left at CD Projekt Red that worked on Witcher 3 and all of this stuff. And, it was a pretty robust, no, that's not what's happening. There's still 100 people here who worked on that game. The head of story is still here. We've never worked with this consulting company you won't stop asking about. So I think you're kind of seeing some studios and studio heads push back. But then, you are going to see on the other side of that coin, people like the CEO of the company, Lords of the Fallen, and even the Helldivers 2 guy kind of trip up over what they're saying. At least in the case of the Helldivers 2 dude, I think he was trying to toe a line. And I think that's a prime example of why you can't toe a line. I think you're if you're trying to say both things and nothing at the same time, if you're kind of trying to be like, well, we don't want to force woke in our games, but we also don't want to be hateful, but we don't want to make it seem forced. If you do this dance, nobody is going to believe you. So I think in the strange space we're in now, that kind of corpo marketing speak is not going to cut it, because unfortunately somebody has decided, a group of people has decided, that there is this massive culture war in video games that needs to be fought. And unless you are doing something like what Square Enix is doing or what CDPR did to push back in ways that are pretty simple and pretty clear cut, you're gonna leave that space open for people to fill it in with sludge and shit. Or you're gonna do like what the CEO did for Lords of the Fallen and just spew the shit yourself.
Yeah, and I think the other part of that winds up coming into that larger discussion is again, who is this for, right? The idea of, if you don't put woke in your game or DEI in your game, definition pending on what those terms mean to every individual who pulls it up. I think there's a layer of that also does a disservice, not only to the audiences that you do have, but it also signals that I'm not even going to say that those folks are getting wins by doing any of the stuff that they're doing. Even if when companies kind of shift messaging and kind of soft shoe, their ideas around not riling up the mob, those folks take that instantly as a win, right? They're like, oh, we got them to bend the knee on whatever it may be in that space. But it doesn't. What does that do for the employees internally? That's the things that I worry about the most. Is especially when it came to the conversation around Helldivers. For months, that community manager was harassed by the same folks that are the usual suspects. thrown under the bus potentially. Again, who's to know what the internal policies were for how you conduct yourself as a CM and a community manager in that space. You know, I've been in that role multiple times, and I know that it's a prickly line sometimes of, you know, what are the internal policies that I have as a human being and the person doing that work, and how does that reflect what the studio is trying to do? I think that's always a balance there. But if you're a company that's doing that work and you're like, hey, we have needs on our staff, and you send that message out to say, we're going to basically say that these folks also have a seat at the table, how do you then deal with that as a company moving forward and saying, we want you to be a part of this online layer of what we do as a company? From the conversations that you've had over the years with folks who are doing this kind of work, are you feeling like a lot of them are feeling like they're getting thrown under the bus when it comes to the mob coming to their doorstep?
I mean, I have heard from several people who have been kind of I've experienced it myself too. Yeah. There is a lot of fear of pushing back in any way, shape, or form, and perceived like alienating a perceived like potential section of your customer base, right? I think what's interesting is that fear doesn't seem to be reversed. You don't seem to have that fear that, you know, woke people don't want to play your game if you say we don't want to include pronouns in it. You know, I think that's really interesting. And I think it speaks to the kind of MO of the right-wing reactionary groups of people, is that it becomes capitalism becomes like part of the battlefield, like consumerism and their wallet is their sword. And that's how they believe in all of this stuff. Whereas I think in reality, a lot of the people who work at these companies who may be marginalized or may just agree with having a diverse or not getting harassed. It must be really odd to kind of be in this situation, because at least me or you know, we're not beholden to, let's say, I don't work for Nintendo and Nintendo doesn't have some sort of set of rules about how I need to react or behave in this space, right? I do have some level of freedom for how I navigate this shitstorm that we've all kind of been walking through for months. But if you're worried about losing your job because you push back against this stuff, or your work environment becoming even more hostile or uncomfortable, you probably just kind of have to sit there and take it. I've heard also, in less frequently, but I have heard some instances of people being like, yeah, you know, my company is protecting me. They're going through legal for XYZ because this thing said this about me. And, you know, they've helped me with support, emotional support and stuff like that. And that does happen. It's definitely more rare. So much so that I had a developer who's worked on tons of games in my chat when I was covering this, who jokingly went, oh, an employer sticking up for their employees. Like, what? Never heard of it. So it is, and they've worked at some pretty big companies. So I think it is definitely super rare that you see something like what Square Enix is doing. And for it to even be not even rooted in like US culture at all, for this to have come from their Japanese HQ as like this is something that we've decided we need to do, I think also speaks volumes, because we don't even have I don't have a frame of reference for how bad harassment campaigns get online in Japan, or if they're even picking up on the same kind of stuff that culturally is gaining ground here in terms of, you know, with Final Fantasy XIV, it was this trans voice actor. I mean, I have no concept if that's where this even started. I can assume because it's been so bad and because Yoshi P talked about it too, but I'm not really sure, but it's very clear that even other countries are like, what the fuck are you doing?
I mean, in a really interesting way too, like the cultural layer of that is really important. And I think that shouldn't be overlooked, that even in a culture that is very based in respect, right? A culture that is very like beholden to the ideas of respect, that they are now also having to deal with. It feels like another American export that we've given to Japan, right? In a weird way. Like, we give them shitty TV, and now we also give them harassment from gamers. Like, that's a weird layer to think about in that way.
Yeah, you're welcome, guys.
Yeah, here you go. Gaming is for everyone. But not y'all. But it's like a weird space in which that works. Before we let you go, because I know you're tight on time, I'd love to hear your thoughts about where do we go from here, because I think, you've been in the shitstorm for a long period of time. I'm the person who is now Huggy Bear, and also I never pay for games anymore, and all the other things that are now my claim to fame. Mm-hmm. As a person who is dealing with this on the ground level in a really daily way for a long period of time. Mm-hmm. Seeing things like this, where are you hoping that this kind of goes forth? What's the added layers to this that you think are necessary to really make these kinds of policies stick in a way that American companies will actually lift their heads out of the sand and do something about it?
Well, I mean, first of all, you and I had a conversation about what the industry needs to be doing in like March about this. And it's just so wild that it's been, 10, 11, whatever months since we had that conversation, 10 months, 9 months. And now we're kind of seeing like one of the major companies take a stand, and a loud one. And I know that we've seen bits and pieces of it and drips and drabs, but I think going forward, more companies should be making it very clear what is and isn't acceptable in terms of how you treat your employees. And I think from a messaging perspective, a lot of these companies who are worried about making an outright claim of gay folks, and if you gay folks don't buy the game, which they definitely are scared of and would probably never do, or they would never flat out say, I think I said on my stream, no one would ever flat out say with Gamergate in a company forum, no one would ever give that name out, I think, or breathe more life into it, because they kind of know that that's a sort of calling card for people to show up and freak out. But I think approaching this from perspectives that can be, unless you are purposefully misunderstanding something or maliciously misunderstanding something, this is just a very clear anti-harassment policy. It's the cue. If you beat the hell out of an MTA employee on the subway, you can get arrested.
Right.
That's a rule. If you harass an MTA employee verbally on the New York City subway, you can get arrested and fined. And that's just a rule that they've passed. Now, does that mean that it probably helps, I don't know, the women conductors who might get yelled at more than the men? Sure. But they haven't said it's this movement to protect women in the subway who work for the MTA. Right. They've just made it very clear that you can't harass our employees. So I think this approach that Square Enix has is clever on a lot of levels, because it can be something that can be applied by a lot of companies that is just a blanket, don't harass our employees and don't harass them about their identity. What I actually found really interesting is this denial of personality line. Mm-hmm. It's a little weird because this was also translated and I'm not sure exactly what it could mean, but it could mean you denying someone's chosen gender, or their identification. You're denying that exists, or that's what they are. And I think, again, this isn't a rainbow flag banner header into we support gay people and everyone in Final Fantasy is gay, and also, ACAB and, Black Power and all of these things that would make everybody freak out. But it is a very clear, the kinds of people that they are attacking, that the right-wing reactionary movement attacks, are people that they believe to be lower on the ladder, the corporate ladder, people who they think aren't in a financial position to just sort of be like, I don't care, I don't need this job. And those are often people of color, marginalized folks, and women. So this protects those people. And yeah, again, without being like, here's my little like pride button, it is in turn shoring up support for those people that work at your company. But it also means that just, Greg, the white dude who's cisgender and straight, if he's getting harassed, you can stop them for that too. So to me, it's like a win-win for everybody, because at the end of the day, harassment is bad. Slander is bad. Threats are bad. Stalking is bad. And I don't think that that's a crazy thing to say, but who knows? This might get clipped and it'll become like.
Alyssa
Mercante thinks harassment is bad.
you as my black sister from Gaming While Black. as we both throw up our power fists and fight for the cause. I mean, but
even.
but I'm removing that from the internet now as a thought. I mean, I know most people don't listen past the first thing they heard, but I am not claiming Alyssa as being black in all those ways.
Please don't.
No, not doing that. But I think the other layer of that too is a thing that I think is really important, that I think, that line is very specific and very important, is we have to remember that a lot of the folks who are being targeted, especially ones I've seen targeted most recently, are not front and center folks. These are folks that the harassers have specifically targeted, have gone after, have gone towards, and have said, because you have said, hey, why don't you use my preferred name when I work at this place? You are now a part of the woke mind virus, or you are a person who is asking for more than what you deserve in a role that you have garnered and have earned through the multiple, games that you've helped to ship and all of those kinds of things. So we're seeing a lot of the extension of the harassment move past, the people who are the most visible, the community managers, the folks who are the CEOs, the folks who are the devs that usually get put out. That is also being extended in really awful and gross ways. And, I am hoping that, this suit that you've employed, I think has been good to see as a layer there as well. I think it's been great to be able to see people start to think about the external factors that lead into that. What is it like to have your name and likeness in places and being used in ways that are nefarious and leading to misinformation and disinformation. But also seeing companies do this kind of work to be able to bolster what they potentially can do and what they can use as tools in their toolbox for that stuff. Any last 100%. Thoughts about kind of this in the overarching space of where we are and where we hope to kind of see?
I mean, I just think that the internet is fast and the law is slow. And the more that we see examples of what happened with Bungie a few years ago, or just people at least saying, listen, there could be a legal ramification for you harassing our employee. I think that is at least a step in the direction of trying to make this space a little bit less hostile for the people who are, at the end of the day, all of us are just doing this because we love games. We love making games, writing about games, talking about games. If you think that you or I don't love those things, then why in the hell do you think we would continue to do this?
Right.
I would have turned off all my social media and, walked into the sea if I didn't care about this anymore. Or I would have turned off all my social media and went back to pouring shots at the bar as a bartender and never working in this. This is what we love.
Right.
And this is what we've loved our entire lives. And all we want to do is keep making these things or talking about these things, commenting on these things. And we just want to be able to do it without fear of, threats, harassment, and more. And I think that is such a low bar of what, we want. And I think the idea of us wanting, something larger and grander aside from just a job, a chance to talk about stuff, and maybe characters that look and feel like you, I think that's where the conspiracy stuff starts to come into play. And that's just people who, I won't even say that they're not smart. I will just say that they're lazy because they haven't done any sort of looking into this themselves, and they just believe something that someone else tells them at face value. And that is such a stunted way to live your life. So I'm hoping that this kind of tide that we are seeing get worse in some ways, the election and everything, it does all tie together. It does all embolden bad actors in the space. I really hope that the Square Enix thing and, CDPR pushing back is a good example of what's to come in 2025, because I really don't want my friends and my peers to have another hell year. Can we just have a nice one? Is all I'm asking.
Can we just chill the F out for a hot second?
Chill. I'm going to be 35. I need everyone to relax.
Right? I'm saying. And again, I think the underlying part of that as well is, again, I think the gaming for everyone thing is real. Like, I think that's a thing that if you pay attention and you just don't think that this is a thing that is personally attacking you in the ways that we see so many of these supposedly aggrieved folks talk about this in this culture war of all the things that are woke and all the things that are DEI. I mean, they're blaming DEI on fire now. So what the fuck? Again, if we've gone that route and everything is potentially woke, then I just need everyone to figure out where they stand on that in a real way. That being said, Alyssa, as always, it is fantastic to see you. It is always great to talk to you. We have to do this more often and get some more time in to hang.
Yes, please. I would love to. I mean, I don't have a job, so hit me up whenever. I'm going to go back to packing for my secret trip. But
No doubt. Thank you for being here. Everybody at home, we're going to take a quick break and we'll have some more Spawn on Me? Yeah, that's the name of my show. Have some more Spawn on Me right after this. Hey everybody, Kahlief here from the Spawn on Me podcast. Hey, we have been in the market for new PCs for a long time, and for our 10th year anniversary, the wonderful folks from NZXT have partnered with us in a collab to be our hardware sponsors. So, if you are looking for a new PC to stream or to game in the best way possible, go check out nzxt.co/SpawnOnMeBLD, and you'll be able to find a perfect PC for you, whether that be the Player 1 machine, Player 2 machine, or Player 3 machine. The ones that we're rocking for our new studio build. They have everything you possibly could need for the best PC experience on the planet. Remember to go check out nzxt.co/SpawnOnMeBLD, and they will get you set up right. Much love and peace.
Hey there, my name is Naomi, and you might know me from internet things like hosting for IGN. I'd like to introduce you to my new show, This Week in Gaming. It's 20 minutes, short and sweet, and every week I go through all the important gaming news that you need to know, and then we have folks on like Kahlief Adams, who shows up quite often, talk about all the important news. And you get to listen to it wherever you get your podcast, so it's easy to find. Just look for This Week in Gaming and make sure to give it a follow. And every week, Monday at 9 p.m. Pacific time, you get a brand new episode. I hope you'll join me.
Welcome back to the show. We have our last piece of conversation from the 411 for this episode of Spawn on Me, and that is all about Hyper Light Drifter going into early access. I have been very, very excited for this game. It is a game that has been on my radar for a very long time. Had a chance to preview this bad boy a little bit earlier in 2024 at Summer Games Fest, and I came back from playing that and feeling really, really good about where that game was going to wind up landing. So anytime you can do anything for a game like this in that universe, I'm already down for. Heart Machine continues to be one of my favorite developers, and getting a chance to see them continue to grow in this space and find good ways to connect with a new audience around an IP that they've already built is super dope. It is super cool to be able to see that happen and be broadened out into a lot of different ways. So it's going to be dropping in January 14th, which is basically tomorrow, to be able to get into early access if you want to go check out the game and play more of it. It is a open world game in which you are finding and collecting and pulling in your homies. It's not a co-op game in that way, but you're joining the breakers and bringing in, all of these elements into this almost roguelike experience in the ways that you've been playing it. So I just wanted to share that with the audience because that's a game that I think you should definitely be checking out. It is really, really fantastic. It is a thing that I've been anticipating for a long period of time, and I think it's going to be something that you are definitely going to dig if you are digging into games like this. So I got to give them a massive shout. We're about to get up out of here for this episode of Spawn on Me. In our return, I have to give a massive shout out and some love to Alyssa Mercante for coming through and hanging out and talking to us about the Square issues. We didn't even talk about Assassin's Creed getting delayed until further into 2025. They're moving themselves out of the February window, which is jam-packed with a bunch of games already. So we're seeing them move out of that space into a much larger one. And finding a good space for where that game is going to land, because I'm very excited about that as well. So massive love to you all. Thank you all for hanging and rocking with me here on this episode 534 of the Spawn on Me contest, the Spawn on Me podcast. You can tell I'm a little rusty. The Spawn on Me podcast. Make sure you're checking us out on twitch.tv/SpawnOnMe for our live shows. You can check us out on Kahlief Adams on X. You can check us out also on youtube.com/SpawnOnMe, and of course on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all the places that you find podcasts. Go leave us a 5-star review. Go leave us some good info in those spaces for sure. And if you have any conversations that you want me to dig into, any questions you want me to dig into, go to speakpipe.com/SpawnOnMe, and let's do some Ask Ka Anything episodes this year. I'd love to do some of that for sure. So until then, much love to you all. We hope you have a wonderful week and a wonderful beginning to your 2025. We have lots of goodness coming in next week with some fun conversations for sure. MLK Day is happening. The inauguration is happening. But we have lots of things coming into the world for Spawn and me and all of you goodness out there. So much love to you all. Have a wonderful week and peace.